You're looking to cut through the noise, yeah. Grab the essential understanding, the insights that really matter, and, well, do it efficiently. That's pretty much the core of what we're doing right here. Think of this as your direct path, sort of a shortcut, to grasping the inner workings of
Yeah,
organizations.
how they learn, adapt, and, try to improve.
Exactly.
Today, we're diving deep into organizational behavior and development, OB and OD. We're drawing from a really interesting mix of perspectives on some fundamental questions.
Right.
We'll be exploring how organizations actually try to get better, what core forces shape behavior within them, and even how we perceive and connect with each other at work.
Precisely. We've got material covering definitions, different methods, comparisons between key ideas, some established frameworks, and explanations of, well, really crucial concepts.
So it's a guided tour, basically.
Consider it your guided exploration of the essential knowledge, understanding how organizations function, learn, evolve, and ultimately how the people inside operate. Our goal: equip you with valuable insights you can actually apply.
Whether you're leading a team or just trying to understand your own workplace better.
We're just curious about group dynamics anywhere.
Hmm.
Okay, let's start to unpack this.
Let's do it. Maybe start with how organizations intentionally try to improve. That brings us straight to organizational development, OD.
Okay.
It's generally seen as a planned, long-term kind of effort, focused on boosting an organization's effectiveness, the way people work together and its overall culture. It's really about applying behavioral science principles.
To make real lasting changes.
Exactly. Positive, lasting changes.
And our sources mention, what, 6 common methods used within OD?
That's right. 6 key approaches.
The first one is survey feedback. This one seems pretty intuitive, actually.
It does. You gather input from employees, usually through surveys.
Right. Anonymous, often.
Often, yeah. Then you analyze what you find and crucially share those results back with the teams involved.
So it's not just data gathering for management?
No, the idea is to pinpoint the real issues together and then collaboratively develop action plans.
Yeah.
It helps build transparency, trust.
Makes sense. Then there's sensitivity training, also called T groups.
Yes, T groups. These involve small group sessions. They're designed to enhance self-awareness, emotional understanding, and interpersonal skills.
How does that work?
The core mechanism is really open feedback among the participants. The aim is to cultivate empathy, cooperation, and maybe some emotional intelligence.
Interesting. So it's quite focused on the individual's development within that group setting.
Very much so. How individual behavior plays out socially.
Okay, next up is team building. And our source actually suggests this one's often seen as maybe the most impactful.
It does suggest that, yeah.
Yeah.
Team building focuses directly on strengthening the bonds and cooperation within teams, usually through different activities, workshops.
Right. The goal being improving communication, building trust.
Exactly. And ultimately, enhancing the team's overall performance. Its direct influence on how teams actually function day to day is probably why it gets rated so highly.
Okay. Then process consultation.
Right. Here, you typically have an external consultant working with the team. The aim is to help them diagnose their own challenges.
So the consultant isn't just giving answers.
No, not really. The focus is more on things like communication patterns within the team, leadership styles being used, how decisions get made, with the goal of refining those internal dynamics, guiding the team to find their own solutions, essentially.
I see. Method 5 is intergroup development.
Yeah, this one tackles potential conflict or, friction between different departments or groups.
The classic silo problem.
Exactly. Strategies here often involve things like joint meetings, setting up shared objectives, trying to build more unity and smoother collaboration across those organizational divides.
Bridging the gaps.
You got it. And finally, number 6, the organizational confrontation meeting.
That sounds intense.
It sounds quite direct, doesn't it? It's typically a one-day event. You bring together people from all parts of the organization.
All levels.
Representatives, yeah. The objective is to openly identify the most pressing problems and then right there, collectively brainstorm and propose solutions.
So very action-oriented, quick problem-solving focus.
Yes, emphasis on speed and broad involvement in generating those ideas.
Okay, so 6 methods, but the source singles out team building as perhaps the most effective?
It leans that way, yeah, because it directly strengthens communication, trust, collaboration.
Which then fuels motivation and problem-solving.
Precisely. It's seen as fundamental to creating those high-performing teams everyone wants these days. That prioritization probably reflects a strong belief in, well, collaborative power in modern work.
That definitely seems to fit with how we think about effective organizations now. And that brings us nicely to the difference between traditional organizations and these learning organizations.
Yes, they represent quite different philosophies, don't they? Different ways of structuring and running things.
So a traditional organization, what does that look like? Often very hierarchical, right?
Very. Heavy reliance on rules, procedures. The main focus is often on stability, control.
Efficiency, discipline, clear roles for everyone.
Exactly. Change is usually approached pretty cautiously.
Hmm.
Maybe not a huge emphasis on, rocking the boat with innovation.
Okay. And the learning organization, how's that different?
Much more fluid,
Yeah.
adaptable, driven by acquiring and using knowledge.
So learning is key.
It's the defining characteristic, really. A culture that actively promotes continuous learning at all levels.
Right. And encouraging innovation, employee engagement.
Absolutely. The focus shifts more towards growth, creativity, and the long-term development of both the organization and its people.
And these differences, they show up in specific areas, don't they? Like structure
Definitely. You've got that rigid top-down structure in traditional orgs.
versus.
More flexible, often team-based structures
Yeah.
in learning organizations. Decision-making, too, tends to be centralized right at the top in traditional setups.
Whereas learning organizations push it down.
They favor more decentralized approaches,
Yeah.
involving people from various levels, more empowerment.
And the approach to learning itself.
Huge difference. Traditional orgs might see learning as, formal training programs you attend.
Off-site workshops, that kind of thing.
Right. Whereas in learning organizations, it's seen as an ongoing process, deeply integrated into everyday work for everyone.
And change. Traditional orgs tend to resist.
Often show resistance
Yeah.
or adapt very slowly. Learning organizations, though, they tend to embrace change. They're designed to adapt proactively. It's part of their DNA.
Communication patterns must be different too.
Oh, definitely. Largely one way in traditional orgs, isn't it? Mostly management down to employees.
Top-down comms.
Exactly. Learning organizations, on the other hand, they really prioritize open, two-way, transparent communication across all levels.
What about innovation?
Often infrequent, maybe approached with caution in traditional settings.
Whereas learning organizations actively encourage it, support it.
That's the idea. The employee role is different too. Traditional view. Maybe employees are primarily there to execute tasks, follow instructions.
And in a learning organization.
They're valued much more as thinkers, learners, active contributors to the organization's overall success, people with ideas.
Even motivation is tackled differently.
Seems so. Traditional places might rely more on control, rules, maybe fear to motivate. Learning organizations tend to focus more on a shared sense of purpose.
A compelling vision. Opportunities for growth.
Exactly. Personal and professional growth. And the overall outlook, traditional, often shorter-term focus, hitting the numbers this quarter.
Learning orgs looking longer term. Sustainability. Continuous improvement.
That's the emphasis. And finally, the culture itself. Formal, rule-bound in traditional places.
Versus.
More open, trust-based, empowering and learning ones.
And the key takeaway seems to be that in today's world, these learning organizations are just more successful.
That's the argument, yeah. Their ability to be innovative, adaptable, people-focused gives them a significant competitive edge.
And the source mentioned examples like Google, Infosys, Apple.
Yeah, prominent examples often cited as embodying that learning organization model. They're built for change.
Okay, so we're getting a picture of how orgs try to improve and these fundamental differences in how they operate. But what about the principles underneath all this? The human behavior aspect.
Right. That takes us squarely into organizational behavior.
OB.
OB. What's the core definition there?
It's defined as the systematic study of human behavior within organizational contexts. So understanding how individuals, groups, and the whole organizational system interact at work.
And the goal.
The overarching aim is really to enhance things like employee performance, job satisfaction, leadership effectiveness, team dynamics, make things work better, essentially.
Okay. And OB has some key characteristics.
It does. Firstly, it's interdisciplinary. It pulls from lots of different academic fields.
We'll get to those soon, I imagine. We will. It's also deeply human-centered, focusing on emotions, motivation, leadership styles. Importantly, it's practical. It aims to give managers actual tools and insights for real-world challenges.
Not just theory.
Exactly. And finally, it's predictive in its goal, trying to understand and anticipate behavior in workplace settings.
And it looks at different levels, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Typically 3 main levels of analysis. The individual level, looking at attitudes, personality, perception, learning, motivation for each person.
Then the group level.
Exploring teamwork, communication dynamics, leadership within groups, conflict, how people work together or don't.
And the organizational level.
That considers the big picture, the overall culture, structure, how the organization manages change as a whole system.
Okay, and this is where those contributing disciplines come in. You said it's interdisciplinary.
Exactly. Our source highlights 5 key fields that really feed into OB. First up, no surprise, is psychology.
Right, the study of individual behavior, mental processes.
Precisely. Gives us a lot on motivation, and the source actually mentions classic models like Maslow's hierarchy, Herzberg's two-factor theory, and the importance of emotional intelligence, too, plus learning, perception, personality, emotions.
And that applies directly to things like recruitment, training, motivation strategies.
Absolutely. Then there's sociology.
Which looks more at social systems, group behavior.
Exactly. Group dynamics, organizational structures. Sociology helps us understand how groups function, teamwork dynamics, organizational culture, power, politics.
So applications in team building, understanding leadership styles, social norms at work.
You got it. Third is anthropology.
Studying cultures, societies. How does that fit in?
It brings really valuable insights into organizational culture, the shared values, rituals, stories, also the importance of diversity.
So particularly relevant for cross-cultural management, global workforces.
Very much so, understanding those cultural nuances. Fourth is political science.
That one might seem less obvious. Power and conflict.
Yeah, but think about it. It examines concepts of power, authority, how conflict is managed. That helps us understand organizational politics, negotiation, decision-making processes.
Okay, I see. Applications in leadership strategy, managing resistance to change.
Definitely. And finally, number 5 is economics.
Resource allocation, incentives.
Right. How resources are used, the impact of incentives. This feeds into understanding cost-benefit analysis, productivity, efficiency within organizations.
So directly applicable to designing reward systems, performance bonuses.
Exactly. Things like that.
And the real power here is how OB brings all these together, isn't it?
That's the key point. Real organizational issues are complex. No single field has all the answers. OB integrates these diverse perspectives for a much richer, more nuanced understanding.
So like understanding motivation involves psychology.
Right. But then addressing team conflict brings in sociology.
And thinking about incentives pulls from economics.
Exactly. They all converge in OB to give that holistic view.
And for managers, having this OB toolkit seems incredibly valuable.
Oh, absolutely. It can lead to better leadership, improved morale, clearer communication, more effective decisions, better conflict resolution.
Ultimately creating better work environments, right?
That's the goal. More positive, more productive workplaces. A strong grasp of OB is really fundamental for building those effective, people-centered organizations we talked about earlier.
And a big part of that must be understanding how people learn at work and how you can sort of shape behavior.
Precisely. Learning and reinforcement are crucial pieces of the OB puzzle.
Okay, so when we talk about learning in OB, it's broader than just formal training, yeah.
Much broader. It's defined as a relatively permanent change in behavior that results from experience or practice, or even just observing others.
So it's how employees pick up new skills, improve performance, adapt.
Exactly. Adapt to changes within the company or the industry. It's described as both ongoing and, importantly, measurable. You can see the change.
And what are the key characteristics of this kind of learning?
Well, it's typically goal-directed. There's usually some purpose behind it. It's based on experience or practice learning by doing, essentially.
Right.
The outcome is a noticeable change in behavior or actions. You do things differently.
Yeah, it sticks. It's permanent.
Relatively permanent, yeah.
Yeah.
Not just a temporary adjustment, lasting change.
Our source mentions 3 main theories of learning.
That's right, the classics. First, classical conditioning, Pavlov's dogs.
With the bells and salivating, yeah. Learning by association.
Exactly. The example given is a worker hearing a bell just before break time. After a while, the bell alone might make them feel hungry, linking 2 stimuli.
Okay. Second theory.
Operant conditioning, mostly associated with B.F. Skinner. This is learning through consequences.
So behavior followed by a reward is more likely to be repeated.
That's the core idea. The example is an employee getting a bonus for hitting targets, which motivates them to aim higher next time.
And this involves different types of consequences.
Yes. Operant conditioning includes positive reinforcement giving a reward, negative reinforcement removing something unpleasant, punishment applying a negative consequence, and extinction, ignoring a behavior to make it stop.
Okay, negative reinforcement needs clarifying, maybe. It's not punishment.
Good point. No. It's about increasing a desired behavior by removing an unpleasant stimulus after the behavior occurs. So if a manager stops hovering over an employee once they start meeting deadlines consistently.
Ah, the removal of the hovering reinforces meeting deadlines.
Exactly. The unpleasant thing stops when the good behavior happens.
Got it. And the third theory?
Social or observational learning, linked to Albert Bandura. This is basically learning by watching and imitating others. Monkey see, monkey do, but more sophisticated.
So it involves paying attention, remembering, being able to replicate the behavior.
And being motivated to do so, yes. The example is new employees learning office etiquette by watching senior colleagues and adopting those behaviors.
Really important for onboarding, mentoring.
Hugely important. Role modeling.
Okay, so building on these learning theories, we get to reinforcement.
Right. Reinforcement is essentially a set of strategies managers can use to encourage or discourage specific behaviors. It comes directly out of operant conditioning principles.
And there are four main types, mirroring the consequences in operant conditioning.
Exactly. You've got positive reinforcement, giving something desirable like a bonus or praise to encourage a behavior.
Negative reinforcement, removing something unpleasant when the desired behavior occurs, like stopping that close supervision we mentioned.
Correct. Then punishment, applying a negative consequence like a warning or maybe a demotion to reduce an unwanted behavior.
And finally, extinction.
Which is basically ignoring a behavior, like not reacting to office gossip, hoping it eventually fades away because it gets no attention.
The significance of understanding both learning and reinforcement seems massive for OB.
Oh, it's fundamental. Absolutely crucial for developing productive work habits, improving efficiency, supporting employee development and training.
And reinforcement specifically helps with motivation, predictability.
Yes, it boosts motivation, fosters discipline, makes employee behavior a bit more predictable for managers, and ultimately helps cultivate that culture of continuous growth and high performance.
We've touched on change and learning quite a bit and how linked they are. Maybe we should explore organizational change and development in a bit more detail and then circle back properly to learning organizations.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Let's start with organizational change. Broadly defined, it's any significant alteration in an organization's structure, its processes, the people, or its overall culture.
And it's essential, right, for survival, staying competitive.
Widely recognized as essential, yeah. For long-term survival, competitiveness, fostering innovation. Change can be planned, intentional, or it can just happen, driven by internal or external factors.
And there are different types of change.
Yes. Strategic change shifts in the basic direction or mission. Structural change, modifying departments. Hierarchy. Technological change, adopting new tools, systems, digital platforms.
And people-focused change.
Aimed at influencing employee attitude, skills, behaviors. Training, culture initiatives, that sort of thing.
Okay. And building on that is organizational development, OD, which we mentioned earlier.
Right. OD is that more structured, research-based effort specifically aimed at improving organizational effectiveness and health, using behavioral science to bring about sustained positive change.
Focusing on individual and team performance processes.
Exactly. And the typical OD process has stages, doesn't it?
It does. Starts with diagnosis, figuring out the problem, then data collection and analysis.
Then feeding that back to the people involved.
Right. Then collaboratively developing action plans, implementing interventions, training, team building, structural tweaks.
And finally, evaluating the results and reinforcing the positive changes. It's a cycle.
And the payoff for successful OD, what are the benefits?
Potentially quite significant. Increased efficiency, higher employee satisfaction and engagement, greater adaptability, maybe less resistance to future changes.
And fostering a more flexible, innovative culture overall.
That's the goal.
Okay, now let's properly circle back to learning organizations. We defined it earlier.
Yes, an organization committed to continuously improving itself by actively promoting and facilitating learning at all levels. Peter Senge's The Fifth Discipline really popularized this idea.
And the key thing is their ability to adapt rapidly, respond effectively to change.
That's central to it. They're built for learning and adapting.
What are some of those defining features again?
Well, a deep commitment to ongoing learning for everyone. free and open sharing of knowledge across teams and departments.
Systems thinking, seeing the interconnectedness.
Yes, viewing the organization as an interconnected web, empowering employees, letting them take initiative, make decisions, contribute ideas.
High adaptability, obviously. And a culture that supports innovation, even risk-taking.
Calculated risk-taking, yeah. A culture where it's okay to try things and learn, even from failures.
And the advantages are pretty clear, aren't they?
They seem to be. Fosters innovation, increases employee involvement and satisfaction, promotes collaboration, develops leaders at all levels.
And ultimately strengthens long-term competitiveness, resilience.
That's the argument. And again, examples like Google, Infosys, Toyota with its Kaizen philosophy.
Right, continuous improvement.
They're often held up as models of this.
So it seems like OD is maybe more about specific plan change projects, whereas the learning organization is about building that continuous improvement capability right into the culture, into the DNA.
That's a good way to put it. They really are complementary approaches. One facilitates specific changes, the other builds the underlying capacity for ongoing change and learning.
And understanding both seems vital for anyone trying to lead or just work effectively today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which brings us nicely to looking at the overall model and framework of organizational behavior itself, how it all fits together. Like the systems approach you mentioned earlier, seeing the org as a living thing where a change in one part ripples through others.
Right. So just to recap OB quickly, systematic study of how individuals and groups act in organizations.
Understanding why people behave the way they do at work.
With the aim of predicting and influencing behavior positively for organizational goals.
Exactly. It's that toolkit for managers, motivation, teamwork, performance.
And we know its features. Interdisciplinary, those 3 levels of analysis, individual, group, organizational, practical application based on behavioral science.
Right. And its objectives. Improve performance and satisfaction, enhance communication, understand motivation and leadership, create positive culture, handle conflict, and change.
Our source brought up Lewin's behavior equation again here, B equals FP.
Behavior is a function of the person and their environment, a foundational idea.
It really underscores that interaction, doesn't it? Internal factors like personality, external ones like culture, both matter.
Absolutely. And the OB framework drills down into those 3 levels. At the individual level, what's the focus?
Individual thinking, feeling, acting. Key elements are things like personality, perception, motivation.
And the source reminds us of Maslow, Herzberg, Vroom theories here.
Right. Plus learning processes, attitudes towards work.
Okay. Then moving up to the group level.
Focus shifts to team interaction. Key elements include communication patterns within the group.
Leadership styles.
Yeah.
Like transactional versus transformational.
Exactly. Team dynamics, conflict, cooperation, how groups make decisions.
And finally, the organizational level.
The big picture, overall structure and culture. Key elements here are organizational culture itself. Shine's model is often used. The formal organizational structure, tall, flat, matrix, etc. How the organization handles change and development. Policies, systems, power dynamics.
The whole ecosystem.
Yeah. The source also briefly mentioned different approaches to OB models.
Just briefly. The human relations approach, emphasizing motivation, relationships. The systems approach, seeing the interconnected parts, like we discussed.
The contingency approach, no single best way, depends on the situation.
Right. Context matters. And the productivity approach, focusing on achieving both high output and high employee satisfaction.
These aren't mutually exclusive, are they? Just different lenses.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Different ways to analyze what's going on. But the bottom line is, understanding OB is just crucial today.
For effective leadership, team building, keeping people happy and staying.
Managing change, driving innovation, building a healthy culture, all of it.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still very relevant to how we function. We're constantly swimming in information, aren't we? At work, everywhere.
Completely bombarded. Our brains just can't process it all.
Which brings us neatly to perceptual selectivity.
Exactly. Perceptual selectivity. It's our natural tendency, really a necessity, to focus on certain things in our environment while filtering out others.
Because our brains have limited processing power.
Precisely. We can't pay attention to everything at once, so our minds act like filters, prioritizing what seems most relevant, important, or just interesting to us at that moment.
And perception is subjective,
Yeah.
right? What I notice you might miss entirely.
Absolutely subjective. The source gave that classic example. You're in a noisy, crowded room, tuning out most of the chatter. But if someone says your name, you snap to attention. You hear immediately.
Exactly. That's selective attention in action, happening unconsciously all the time.
And what influences what we select, there are internal factors, personal stuff.
Right. Internal personal factors. Motivation is a big one. We notice things related to our current needs or goals. Hungry. You'll spot the food ads.
Makes sense. Learning and past experience, too.
Definitely shapes what we focus on. An experienced accountant might spot tiny anomalies in financials that suggest fraud, based on years of looking at numbers.
Personality plays a role.
It can. Extroverts might notice people more. Introverts might focus more on objects or the environment. Our attitudes and beliefs act as filters, too.
How so?
We tend to focus on information that confirms what we already believe. Confirmation bias, basically.
Yeah.
And we might downplay stuff that contradicts our views.
So a manager who thinks their team is lazy might focus only on mistakes, miss the successes.
Could happen, yeah. And finally, personal interests guide attention. Tech lover. You'll spot the new gadgets instantly.
Okay, those are internal factors. What about external ones? Characteristics of the stimulus itself.
Right. External stimulus-related factors. Intensity matters, bright lights, loud sounds grab attention.
Size. Bigger things get noticed.
Generally, yes. Larger objects stand out. Motion is another big one. Moving things attract our eyes more than static ones.
Contrast, something that stands out from the background.
Definitely. The red dress in a crowd wearing black. Repetition also works. Repeated ads, messages are more likely to get noticed eventually.
And novelty versus familiarity.
Both can work, interestingly. New, unusual things grab attention because they're different, but familiar things can also stand out, especially if they have personal meaning or emotional value for us.
And this selectivity, it has real impact in the workplace, doesn't it?
Oh, for sure. It can unintentionally lead to biased decisions. Managers might focus on certain info or certain employees, overlook others.
Leading to people feeling undervalued or ignored.
That's a risk if their efforts just aren't being selected for attention by the boss.
But being aware of this phenomenon, that can help.
Awareness is key. It can help promote fairness, improve communication, understanding what others might be focusing on, and lead to more objective decision-making. Actively trying to see the bigger picture.
Okay, so that's how we selectively perceive things. Now, how do we actually interact and communicate? This brings us to transactional analysis, TA.
Transactional analysis, TA. Yeah, a really insightful theory about personality and communication, developed by Eric Berne back in the mid-20th century.
And it looks at transactions based on psychological states.
That's right, based on what Berne called ego states. The core idea is that understanding these underlying states can seriously improve communication, help resolve conflicts, build stronger relationships.
Especially at...
Very applicable in professional contexts, yeah.
And the basic idea is 3 main ego states: parent, adult, child, PAC.
Exactly, PAC. The theory says everyone operates from one of these 3 states at any given time. And when 2 people interact, the transaction depends on which ego state is dominant in each person.
Okay, let's break those down. The parent ego state.
The parent state includes the behaviors, attitudes, rules we've internalized from our own parents or other authority figures growing up. Learn stuff.
And it has 2 sides, nurturing and critical.
That's right. The nurturing parent is supportive, caring. The critical parent is more judgmental, rule-enforcing, maybe points out flaws.
Okay. Then the adult ego state.
The adult state is about rational, logical, fact-based thinking. When we're in adult mode, we make decisions based on objective info, not strong emotions or old rules.
So good for problem solving, analysis, objective decisions.
Ideal for that, yes.
And finally, the child ego state.
The child state is rooted in the feelings, experiences, emotions from our own childhood. Our inner child, basically.
And that also has facets, natural child and adapted child.
It does. The natural child is spontaneous, playful, curious, fun-loving. The adapted child is the part that learned to respond to the grown-up world either by being compliant and pleasing or sometimes by being rebellious and resisting.
Okay, so parent, adult, child. And based on these, 3 types of transactions can happen.
Correct. First is a complementary transaction. This is where the message sent and the response received come from matching or expected ego states.
Like your example, manager, adult, asks employee, adult, for a report by Friday. Employee, adult, says, okay, I'll have it done.
Exactly. Straightforward, adult to adult. This usually leads to clear, effective communication. No crossed wires.
Okay. Then there are cross-transactions.
Yes. This happens when the message and response come from different or unexpected ego states. This is where communication breaks down.
So manager adult asks, why were you late? Employee responds from child state, maybe defensively. Why are you always picking on me?
Perfect example. That's a cross-transaction. Manager expected an adult response, an explanation, but got a child reaction. These often lead to misunderstandings, arguments, conflict.
And the third type, ulterior transactions.
Ulterior. These are more complex because there's a hidden message underneath the surface message. Two levels operating at once.
Like sarcasm.
Sarcasm is a great example. The words might sound okay, surface level, but the tone or context carries a hidden, often critical, meaning ulterior level. These can be confusing, manipulative, part of psychological games.
So how is understanding TA useful in organizations, in OB?
Hugely useful in several ways. First, it can really improve communication, helping people become aware of their own ego states and recognizing others.
Encouraging more adult-to-adult talk.
That's often the goal, yes. It's generally the most productive mode for workplace communication.
It can help with conflict resolution, too.
Definitely. By identifying the ego state clashes that might be fueling a conflict, people can respond more appropriately, de-escalate things, build empathy.
And for leaders, managers.
It enhances leadership effectiveness, allows them to consciously adjust their style. Sometimes you need to be nurturing parent, sometimes critical parent, carefully, often adult. Maybe even tap into natural child for creativity.
Helps build rapport by understanding team members' patterns.
Exactly. And on an individual level, TA boosts self-awareness. Understanding your own default states, especially under stress.
Lets you gain more control over reactions, make better decisions.
That's the idea. Better emotional regulation, more rational choices.
And finally, useful in coaching or mentoring.
Very much so. It provides a framework for open, non-defensive conversations about behavior and relationships. Fosters a supportive environment for growth.
Wow. We have certainly covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, haven't we?
We really have. From OD methods for improvement to the differences between traditional and learning organizations.
Then fundamentals of organizational behavior, its contributing disciplines.
Delving into learning and reinforcement at work, the complexities of change.
Revisiting learning organizations, looking at OB models and frameworks.
And finishing with how we perceive things selectively and how we interact through transactional analysis. It's been quite a journey.
It really is a comprehensive toolkit of knowledge you've hopefully gained today. We genuinely hope you're already thinking about how these insights connect to your own experiences.
Yeah, whether that's in your job or just in other groups you're part of. How do these ideas about development, learning, behavior, change, perception, communication, how do they play out for you? And maybe here's a final thought to mull over. Reflecting on everything we've discussed. Which of those OD methods, or maybe the learning organization principles, which do you think holds the most potential for creating real, positive, lasting change in the work environments we see today?
And why? What's your reasoning?
Exactly. Perhaps this deep dive has even sparked your interest to dig a bit deeper into one specific area that caught your attention, building on the foundations we've explored together today.